Hello and welcome to Open Timelines. I'm your host, Sébastien Martin, and today with us we have Dr. Richard Alan Miller. Richard is a very fascinating individual who has experiences in alternative agriculture, New Age physics and metaphysics. Is most likely behind the original X-Files with his work with Navy intelligence, and MRU as well in the late 60s. He has amazing experiences to share with us today to do with Antarctica, Freemasonry, and also time travel, I believe, and way more topics today. So, Dr. Miller, welcome to the show.
Please call me Rick, or
okay.
For dinner, or
all right.
I loved Bob Dylan. You can call me later. You can call me Al. Or you can call me.
Right.
I'm Rick. Back in the early '70s, you wanted to talk about Antarctica specifically. Let's go directly there.
Okay.
In between my work that I wrote, the holographic concept of reality, and then the later classified top secret paper, embryonic holography. In around 1973, I was invited to join a team of anthropologists that were going into Antarctica and my position, I was not lead on that job. I was basically the physicist that was there to try to figure out how the light worked inside the cavern. And that paper will be in a book called Spook Central, which is called Bioluminescence. And for medical diagnostics, basically our body is radiating pheromone. And if you use Kirlian photography or some form of ionizing radiation to get internal information by the light that's radiated from ionized gases around the body, that was the slant of the paper that I wrote, by the way. It was way back then. And we now have MRIs and similar devices that do that. But I was in there to try to figure out how the light worked. And while I was there, I saw several remarkable things. The first was the cavern itself was over a mile high.
Right.
And it had weather, rain and wind and, like that kind of thing. It had light. The light was enough that once your eyes adjusted, it was like normal daylight, except that our light today is quite dangerous. If you go outside into the light now, the long ultraviolet spectrum from the change in the sun right at this moment will actually, in fact, damage your eyes. I'm quite concerned about what's going to happen when people try to watch the full eclipse because of the light. It's very non-telling, but it would be very damaging to the eye. Just
right.
You need to armor up on that one. But what I saw a Nazi base, an old for 19 slips for subs. And later I got confirmation from a friend of mine, Matt Abe Abarello, who ran the Brazilian Secret Service, and he, for 42 years, he said that they used to, they had an island just off Brazil that they would stage at before they went in. Mm-hmm. And it was slips for 19 subs. It was all in ruin. Looked like there had been a war there. Like maybe I had heard, unconfirmed, that a nuclear weapon had been dropped during the Kennedy period to take that out after Admiral Byrd got himself whipped.
So how big was the cave? Like you said it was a mile high, but how large was it?
Miles. Okay. Miles. I saw a Viking base from the 14th century. Where's that? I saw that in ruin. Where's that in our history books? It appeared to me that this facility had been known for a long time in history. Okay,
so I need to ask you a question specifically to this location because you went there through the means of a submarine for this expedition.
It came in from the northern part. Yeah, it came in.
Yeah. So, but you went underground. You went under the ice, and then you found some tunnels, some passageways.
There were caves. The whole thing is like they're off of L.A.
So,
like Los Angeles, yeah.
So how deep do you think you were at that point? In the cave?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't have a sense of that because I was inside a ship that I didn't have any visual, being able to 10 miles, 4 miles. I didn't know.
Because if you have like a Viking base and you went underground to get...
It was open. There were open areas where you could go into it. and there would be caves that you could go into right on, as a ship.
But surely, if the whole space was covered in ice for the
how did they get down further? I don't know.
That brings us back to the 1500 PRS map that shows Antarctica and all the borders of Antarctica without ice. And you can see the contours of Antarctica through satellite imagery that identically shows how the PRS map matches.
There's something else that I needed to mention that I saw.
Okay.
One other thing that I saw were some tunnels that went straight down more than 100 miles. Now, at the time of my physics, we believed that was molten rock that had been so compressed it was creating plastic. How did these tunnels or caves or lava tubes or whatever they were, how did they maintain their integrity?
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea. And a good friend of mine that has recently retired from JPL told me that what he heard, which is unconfirmed, was that we did now have the technology to go down that deep, straight down, and that they discovered something. And what he heard was a bunch of Nephilim that were in stasis. And then when that hoorah, maybe 3 months ago, when the Antarctica got evacuated, with all civilians and all of that, he said what he understood was one of them woke up. Now, we have lots of Nephilim in our present day metaphor, independent of, L.A., Marzulli and others that are talking about that. We have Bigfoot, and we have Sasquatch and Yeti, and that has somehow never been recorded, suggesting something very intelligent.
The Navy from New Zealand, cut down their missions short and came back to Christchurch in New Zealand, evacuating Antarctica. Most likely, do you think, after this encounter with the Nephilims?
I don't know. What I do know is that when I taught at Shiprock with Dr. Dick and others, the Anasazi had legends, and so did the Navajo that were up near a ship. They were up in Arizona. What was that? They're cave dwellers. They talk about giants that were cannibal and would eat them. And so there's so many legends that the one in Afghanistan that was supposedly shot by our military, I think may be disinformation. However, I have some friends from Romania that absolutely confirmed the loss of that one team that went in after that giant that they discovered. So I don't know. And it's not my area of expertise. I'm more like a scientist and can vet that part of reality. But from my religious point of view, science isn't any more real than religions are. You knew that, right?
Yes. So when you went to Antarctica in 1973 through this expedition, was it started by the U.S. military?
Yeah, it was an anthropology study. It was I don't know who was sponsoring or funding it.
Mm-hmm.
It might have been so-called private funding. The woman that managed it was real smart. She was later to write in Fields Within Fields. Julia Stuhlman, she wrote, and some other journals like that. The Journal for the Study of Consciousness with Muses and Edward Everett Horton. She was later became known in cybernetic anthropology like Laughlin, D'Aquila, and McManus. She was really smart and was managing the team. And I was just brought along as a young, out of graduate school scientist. I'd only been out of grad school 3.5 years maybe before,
So was this mission, obviously, it was not top secret, it was organized?
I had to sign non-disclosure, and at that time, personally held top secret clearances with 3 volt permits. So they didn't have these above top secret ratings that that I hear about all the time now. What I had was top secret. It's an orange badge, orange top with 3 green buttons on it. That gave me access to certain vaults without a need to know. I ran them essentially, you know, and I was a reader. That's what I did. I would read things and then try to figure out what I was reading, and you know, that kind of thing.
So you don't actually know, you know, how they knew the entrance of that cave to go back to that Nazi base, or even seeing the Viking settlement, because it is known, obviously, by the you know, before the Second World War, that Admiral Byrd was asked by the Nazis to go and go to Antarctica on this mission, and he refused outright because of the political tensions, obviously, between America and Germany.
Well, that's where also the first jets appeared, and Foo Fighters. You know, that's where they whipped and lost, I think, like 3 ships or something like that. In one Russian video that I saw, we got our tails whacked by technology we didn't have at that time. We didn't have jets back then. We didn't have small objects that would be like a drone or something, a Foo Fighter. We didn't have anything like that. We had observations of those things, you know, in the early 50s with Wayne Aho and George Adamski, others. But back then, this was technology. It's 48, 49, somewhere right in there. We didn't have jets.
No.
We had turboprop forms of, you know, propulsion. But now, just off the record, I have friends at Boeing, and we have a magnetic monopole device now that is non-propulsion oriented for moving into space. And that's an interesting concept. I've been told they are using 3 and 4 magnetic monopoles on a device. The 3 is more stable, the 4 is more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know more about that technology, except that if space is curved, if you have 3 fingers that would sit, you know, you can find your you know, a stable point where it won't tip or anything like that with 3 magnetic poles. Having 4 now is more awkward with space-time in terms of how you would orient the device in balancing itself in a curved space system.
Okay.
I don't know quite how that works. That's not I haven't studied it. And right now, unfortunately, I'm an armchair physicist. It means I don't have access to my toys like I used to. That's where when you had access to toys, you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
You know, devices. I was an experimental physicist. And so now you could, you know, isolate variables a lot easier when you were working with devices and tools and toys. That's why our graduate schools always suppressed, you know, outdid other countries because of our toys that we would have access to. Our undergraduate we were never ahead of other countries, and our educational system now sucks.
So Richard, let me go back quickly on just to cover a bit of history to do with Nazi Germany, and during the Second World War. At the end of the Second World War, the Americans did an inventory of all the U-boats that were supposed to be manufactured at the time of the war. And they were seeing that over 100 U-boats disappeared and were not part of the inventory, were not seen as being destroyed. So they were still in existence, but they were vanished. And you are saying that when you went in Antarctica, you saw some U-boat remnants at the base? I didn't
see any U-boats. I saw slips for 19 subs.
19 subs over there.
Yeah, not 19 subs.
Yeah.
Sub slips where a sub could be baked in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Right. But there was no trace of it.
It was all gone. Everything was gone by then.
Right.
70s. Yeah. I heard there was what happened is I did a red ice interview, and I was talking about Antarctica, and some guy after that interview called me from England. He was 10 years my senior. He was in his 80s, and told me he was part of the RAF that went in to mop up after they dropped the nuclear weapon. And he told me that at the time they did the mop up, some of the Nazis escaped into the lower caverns.
Mm-hmm.
that we didn't have the technology to go down into. And I figured the reason we aren't speaking German right now is that they ran into something down below that stopped that nonsense. I don't know.
Right.
But that seems Occam's razor, that something was down there, because obviously there were presence of technologies that I didn't understand, like how those tunnels could maintain an integrity going into plastic.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I don't understand. Our current understanding is below the mantle, 100 miles down, it's so compressed and hot.
Right.
Okay, but that is obviously not the truth. And what I'm now discovering regarding hollow earth and all the rest of that,
Mm-hmm.
the earth is way, way more porous than you can imagine. I live here in bunker heaven, you know, in the free state of Jefferson, where start up in the Oregon caves and they go all the way down into the Heimbom and Hayfork and Weaverville in California. You know, there's one tunnel, it's an artificial one, not a natural one, that is 4.5 hours by motorcycle. And on the East Coast, you can go from Maine all the way down to Florida without ever coming above ground. The Midwest, I've worked with congressmen like Kucinich, others, to network rural communities and bunkers that they have infrastructure, and have seen tunnels that, you know, on the Madrid fault line and other places like that, that are New Madrid fault line, that is, it's surprising just how porous everything is. And I'm here to tell you, just when I first moved here to Oregon, back in the 90s, I had never been to the Oregon caves, and I was doing my little thing with going through the tour of the Oregon caves. And at that very moment, Klamath Falls had a major earthquake, you know, where buildings fell over. That was back in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even know that until I got home that night and was watching it on TV. There was no hint. That's how stable this area here is in regard to earthquakes and the related. It's like bedrock. And there is a book out on that subject called We Are the Earthquake Generation. And they do talk about nuclear winter and why this location where I am right now is considered a more stable possibility, you know, for eventual natural disasters and or, yeah.
So
Vancouver Island, where you are, by the way, is not.
Yeah.
That's Edgar Casey, you know, and he talked about New Atlantis when Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helen, and Mount Olympus go off, and they create a new landmass out there.
Yes.
You know, so, you know, heads up, just, you know, that's what I know.
Yes. And so
sorry about that.
That's okay. So going back to Antarctica, I just would like to ask you one specific question as well about the temperature. When you were underground and when you were observing the Nazi base, when you were outside, you walked around.
No, I wasn't outside. I didn't know I was inside. It felt like you're outside, but I was in a cave.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So you were inside the cave, and how hot was it? Did it feel hot?
Yeah, warm. It was normal 70 to 76 degrees.
Okay.
And it was. I understand there's thermals there.
Yes.
And if you will find, even on the surface now, there are places in Antarctica that are almost semi-tropical.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because of these thermals and other. You know,
and because of global warming as well, or, you know, obviously.
Well, I don't know about the global warming thing. You see, that's another one that Trump et al. Are either going to buy into or not buy into. I think that thinking man is changing our climate is foolish. There's only one thing I know that actually affects the weather, and that's the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And something is affecting our sun right now.
Right.
And so with that said, I don't know what it is. Do we have global warming? No. I think what we have is a pole shift. And that's Dr. Bert Bolin, University of Stockholm, that got a Nobel Prize on that. And electrodynamics with physics I've studied with, you know, out of Texas and so on. There's Wheeler, John Wheeler, and others like that have physics called geoelectrodynamics. And one year when I was teaching at the UW, he offered a graduate course while he was on the John Dance lecture series at the University of Washington. And there were 12 graduate students that were elected in, and I was a 13th that was allowed to monitor as a physicist. And I remember when John walked into the room, he didn't even say good morning to us. He went straight to the blackboard and started writing equations. And he said, not only does weather affect man's consciousness affects the weather. And he started writing the equations on how that works. Mm-hmm. And I was, John Wheeler. There's things done in physics that we do not yet have models for. That's why we have models, and they only last.
So Rick, maybe it was for me to say it was global warming, it wasn't the right word. It's more like climate change, and we're definitely
climate change. Absolutely, no question.
I'm aware of the change in the poles, like even the Gulf Stream. All the currents are changing. So I've seen these data.
1,000-year plan, not 100-year. Yeah,
it's a combination of factors, because at the same time the Earth is moving away from the sun. We are in a 46,000 year wobble around the sun. And currently, the Earth is actually moving away from the sun, and we should be normally entering into a new ice age, which will take years and years and years. But it's a combination of factors with the currents changing direction.
The day after tomorrow. Well, that movie is accurate, and that has to do with the desalinization of the ocean and the rise of the ocean. And now that the Gulf Stream is no longer existing. I remember a time when there were 7 currents that actually affected European weather. And now then it dropped down to 4 currents, and now there's only a single one. And they're starting to suggest that the weather that Antarctica used to enjoy is now moved to Central Europe. And that's counting, okay. So but I remember when they had a contest for amateur astronomers to find Planet 7. And someone discovered it. There it is. There it is. And Caltech and then Stanford came out and confirmed, yeah, there's a planet out there by Uranus that we didn't know. Where did it come from? And then there were 7 planets out there. How does that work? And it's like another solar system going through each other. And what most likely is periodic events, as we have different cycles, the 26,000 year cycle where we return in the solar system, the solar system returns to where it was in the original galaxy that it currently enjoys, and out on the rim. And I had to say that Mayan calendars and other things that tried to predict the so-called 2012, the way I try to fluff that a little bit, is that the right word, is to quote Joseph Campbell when he says that when you see the kingdom of the Father on earth, the apocalypse has already occurred. It is perpetual in its potential. Now, we have different cycles that we go through. There's the 6,000 year one you're suggesting. There's the 26,000 year one that Mayan calendars, others would try to suggest. And we are discovering races that existed before our history, like the Clovis culture that the Hopis sing about. They, down in near Popo, I've been there. I've seen the ruins. It's unbelievable. That we're talking about a facility or a city that was bigger than New York City and more advanced. And now they're suggesting that that culture had space travel when they crawled out of a cave. And you go to France and the Cave of Dreams, and you look at this bison, and the original anthropology would have said, oh yeah, bunch of cavemen painted that bison. And a closer inspection, you'll notice dots around the eye that correspond to a star map. And then you look at caves further south, and those star maps are in reverse, indicating they were witnessed from space. And so my sense is that from Occam's razor, that we've been here before.
Oh, yeah.
And okay, and yeah, we've been here before. Here we go. Hang on, it's going to be a bumpy ride. I don't know. What I do know is time is not what we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I've written extensively like that for the military and my own writings, made some discoveries. I will quote such mentors as Sir Roger Penrose when I was at Princeton. I was trotted out. I have studied under at least 20 Nobel Prize winners in physics alone. And so I was gifted. They wanted me to have the education. And I am here at the so-called end of days, and I don't know, because I don't think it works like that. It's about the moment. Mm-hmm. And the whole thing is a closed caption, it's a cavitation ball, into the out of. You got your infinity sign and you turn it upside down, and what you've got are two brains with a new adult. There you are, the same metaphor in terms of binary systems and into the out of. And when you look at the universe from that perspective, now time becomes a lesser measure in a multiverse system of physics. And the current math that's used on that is not theory over string theory. They're working with Kaufman and some of his math in the way a plasma will interface with itself without, and then if you pull the knot, just like a bowline or something you learned in Sea Scouts, each one does something a little different, slip knots, so you can make your thing, adjust it to your own neck size and things like that. All of that is suggesting metaphor of something more going on here in terms of this being the sixth epoch and trial by fire. Taphasia, the electricity and nuclear radiation, here we are. It's I don't have a sense of it other than I can tell you that physics is changing, and as alchemy led to chemistry, today I see physics leading to magic. Magic, as defined by Crowley et al., is the art of changing consciousness at will. And we talk about altered states, and I have seen a woman rip a car door off that's impossible. Her bones would break, and yet she could rip that car door off to save her child. How does that work? Mm-hmm. And there's something else going on here.
Well, it's the power of intent. I mean, at the end of the day, we create our own reality. And when you...
Well, there you are, imagination. Yeah. Now we start to realize that physics and the study of it is the study of all these gifts that God gave us of altered states. One of that, which I've written about, is that your instinct when you're talking to a future timeline is not where you are right here, but just slightly right there. Mm-hmm. And that altered state there, your ability in guessing is 400 times over statistical inference. How does that work? Mm-hmm. And it's consistent, and you can improve it. And individuals live like that as psychics and or seers and or channeling and or women's intuition, EQ, the Bene Jesuit rule. You got physical IQ, and then above that in information is EQ, or how you feel about the physical plane, and why we worship women.
So that leads me to my next question, as your involvement with the Navy SEALs and how you train them to become super soldiers. Can you, tell us exactly how you transitioned from, being a scientist to then work within the Army or the Navy to train super soldiers? Can you?
Yeah, by the way, that Menesteric Goats was 10 years later, and to think a general had the wrong mental attitude because you can't run through a wall. What's wrong with that equation? That's Army. That's why they call it oxymoron. But Navy has always ruled the world. When I came out of undergraduate school at Pullman, old man DuPont was there to hire me. And he's the one that took me to Delaware. And so that's where it all started. They already had a bullseye on me, and it had nothing to do with degrees. It had to do with insight. That's where I met Gabor. and first saw a three-dimensional color TV at the Experimental Research Station in Wilmington. I saw it. Where is that in our market today? And yet that led me to write about what a hologram is n dimensions of information in n-1 dimensions. It's the way information collapses into or out of itself like a fractal. And membrane physics is what's now being, vessel functions are what are being used to understand cavitation processes at MIT, where they study cold fusion and the leading edge of a wave. Jerry Pollack was my lead in 1970, and the way he discovered exclusion zone water was that he wanted to know why a muscle seemingly had memory and going back to its original state. And that's when he discovered that water has another stage or phase called H3O2. It's hydrogen peroxide with an extra molecule, and will account for why when water touches anything, it changes its memory structure of isotopes, isomers, and all the rest of it. You know, you have in water itself, levorotary, which gives you ortho and para water with dipole moments going in opposite directions. And they stack on each other and set up a relationship when they touch plastic or they touch tellurium, and you have your thing to the point where I don't know, what is that called, that place where water changes and in its relationship to electrostatic forces against an object. It's a memory system that is possibly 1 million times, 6 zeros, more efficient than current gallium and arsenic that would form a forbidden zone. And it's, you know, where you do your checksum error theory, you know, in your registers for information. And so water is an interesting, led me to compare it in time with, at the moment of death, the body experiences a 3.2 ounce weight loss. That's been documented. What is that? Well, Sir Roger Penrose, others are suggesting that it's structured water in a microtubule that goes back home and if you use that metaphor as a model, what happens next is that you are discovering that you do that every night in certain specific forms of dreaming. And one of the reasons why certain Aborigine tribes that are considered Aborigine as opposed to higher technology, which they actually are, more in tune with their environment, would suggest certain dream states have more content to reality than consciousness does. That consciousness is a type of sleep. And that what you're doing every night is going back home for renewal. You do that with astral projection. I have discovered soul travel as a satsangi. I'm initiated to Sharon Singh and meditate, train my mind, and actually physically go someplace else that I don't know what it is. You know, Sachkan or whatever they call it in the Upanishads.
It would be interesting to see, you know, how the weight loss will occur also if you do hypnosis, or if you do some, you know, ayahuasca ceremonies, or... These
are very interesting questions, ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is not dimethyltryptamine, FYI. In fact, Daime Church and some of the other religious groups today are far less spiritual than they were originally in their original content when you went into the Amazon and studied crabgrass or some of the other natural sources. Because when Daime Church says their formula is more correct than this other church, that doesn't sound very spiritual to me. So I have concerns on the way drugs are being used, and I think it's one of the reasons why Leary et al., Metzger, wrote the varieties of psychedelic experiences. You know, the Buddhists have 4 reasons for getting high, and only one of them is for escape and recreation. What are the other 3 for? Advanced stages of consciousness, where you jumpstart your brain's own production. Because the dimethyltryptamine that's being used now is a 5-alpha. That's Blake and how you smoke it or you eat it. There's crabgrass and other things like that. that 5-pound crystal that you see that Terence McKenna used to, I grew that at the University of Washington for him. I can't believe it. It was done under a hood with high-end technologies. That's one of the things I did, was writing about drugs and how they are different than our neurotransmitters that are similar physical chemistries that are basically gateways or doors. That's why I have extreme concern about ketamine, where dimethyltryptamine is that chill that you have. You know how you go and you have that chill? That's DMT. That's N, N hyphen dimethyltryptamine that's being released by your brain. And really, what that neurotransmitter does is it stimulates a series of cilia on your nervous system that start setting a standing wave, either up or down the body. Gopai Krishna, Sri Aurobindo, you pick one. Which direction do you want to go? That is actually light in the visible light band region. That's why they call it the light. And if you center your spine just right, you can, in fact, stimulate and awaken your pineal gland. Now, what that does is it sets up a standing wave in your neural cavity, and now, as an adult, you can regenerate nerve tissue rather than glial cells if you have the right things. And that is Ward Dean, who is Surgeon General for the Marine Corps, writing in his book, with biological aging mechanisms, clinical approach. And so those were some of the things I integrated with SEALs at all during the training periods of the early SEALs, which are different than the new SEALs. The first 3 teams were much smaller, and most of those guys were like me. They were what we call polymaths, and that's why your earlier SEAL units are still around. Albeit we're in this arm here is shorter than this arm here. I've got 4 inches shorter because I got titanium in it, so it's no bone. Got stories. Well, we went through that, and now the SEAL units are calling them super soldiers. Back then, when I trained them, it was not called that. I was teaching them how to control autonomic functions so that they could interrogate or be interrogated. That's why I talk about NLP, body language, and other forms of communication, how to control brainwave states so that you can control a polygraph reading, that kind of thing, or understand how that works. One of the training things I did with SEALs was that I taught them how to change their perception of time using breath control, so that their boxing then became paranormal. They had the precision of Tai Chi, and yet they were moving like Hung Gao. Boom, boom, like that. But you experienced it in slow motion with a precision.
Right. So what you described earlier about the DMT and the brain creating that chill, it's also described in the Kundalini experience. Where people are experiencing that from the bottom of the spine up through, the head, and
Krishna, Sri Aurobindo, one's going up, the other's going down with
right. And I've experienced this. I personally experienced this in 2011 when I had my own awakening. I didn't know where it was. I could basically walk on rocks without feeling the pain of the sharp rocks if I triggered this Kundalini and through the chill. And I can create it on demand, anytime I want.
Anybody can. That's the wonderful part. Yeah. And taking drugs like ayahuasca, what that does is that it floods the body and jumpstarts it into producing its own lysergic acid amide. That neurotransmitter is the one that goes, aha, when you connect one dot with another. That part is essential in changing reality. And the way Aleister Crowley, others called that, is the mass of the Holy Ghost, sex magic, that led out of Kundalini and some of the other previous epochs, and their study of these kinds of phenomena as a relationship to ganglia points in the body called chakras, or the oils released in different parts of the body, which were nadi points, or oils and waxes. Oils, fats, and waxes. Yeah, that you have Apocrine glands where molds set up, and there's reasons why these habitats exist as other alternative systems of communication, pheromone, like that. I don't know how that all works. That's one of the areas that I study for the military.
Mm-hmm.
These are mostly not alien, they're from previous technologies, that we had on Earth. Popo. And
so how many years have you worked with the Navy SEALs?
6 of 11, SEAL Corp of 5. I did SEAL Corp in the early years out of Amherst with Ted Kruger. That was my handler. And then I got introduced to Dr. What's his name? When it was Mankind Research, Dr. Carl Sliker. Sliker has got to be an alien. He was at the same desk on Wisconsin Avenue for 48 years. Now, I know I'm sitting here for a long time in front of my computer, but who does that? He was, he had Dr. Wilbur Franklin out of Kent State, and then me out of the University of Washington. And we were regional directors that did everything I did everything on the West Coast. That was the front door for military, Navy studies on paranormal. And whenever they had anything weird, they would bring an A-team. I had the wonderful fortune of being able to study under Andrea Puharich. Bill Tiller and some others were under our direction. We would set up projects, and then they would go off and do these things, and I would have maybe as many as 30 projects ongoing at any given time in China Lake, Argonne, Livermore.
Were you working at the time? Were you working at the time with being on the West Coast with the SRI, the
Stanford Research? That's where Puharich was based. Yeah.
So were you experimenting with remote viewing as well at the time?
No, remote viewing was later. It started in '81 or '82 with Targ and Puthoff. They were not there in '79 when I was there.
Mm-hmm.
I knew about them. We were more interested in astral projection. Alex Kavarainen and others have written extensively about the dangers of remote viewing. You can find that in Emergent Mind Bulletin on the internet. The editor was Leon Sidorov. She was Russian. That has subsequently since stopped because she went to have children, and she had her child, and so we stopped that. But Alex Kavarainen was a Finnish. He had a student under him, Matti Pitkinen. Both of them wrote about the dangers of remote viewing. Why their take on and mine concerns me about remote viewing as opposed to astral projection is that astral projection has a cord, so there's a relationship to you coming from the inside going outward. Mm-hmm. Remote viewing is more like the Ghosts of Mars, where you are allowing something you're looking through their eyes. It's a PK phenomenon. It's outside the body, and as such, may change you. And especially if you're using enhancements like drugs.
I made an interview with Terry Anderson, who lives on Vancouver Island and was actually trained to be a remote viewer, and which is interesting because she's also using it. I'm sorry.
It's newer, right? It's like in the 90s and 80s. Not the 70s.
Yes, but the techniques she's using is it's mostly to almost predict the future, trying to help people to become a clairvoyant, basically. So she's using remote viewing to see.
But it's not clairvoyance if you work with Dr. Rind, where he separated them into ESP phenomena and PK phenomena. One is outside the body, and one is inside the body. And the astral projection part of taking your consciousness to location to observe something and then bringing that information back here is quite different than remote viewing.
I agree.
That was the point that Alex Kavarainen wanted to make about the dangers of remote viewing.
There's also a part that you haven't mentioned in remote viewing is the bilocation aspect, which when people can see you at a different location, yet that person may not be aware of even doing it. Like I personally had that experience myself, and I've been seen by other people where I had no recollection of that event. Now, this could have been triggered by something else. I don't think I was
Ghost of Mars. It isn't coming from inside you, which is astral projection.
right.
It is remote viewing, which is outside you, like levitation, apportation. Okay. Remote viewing is the analog of, but does not have a silver thread or cord that connects.
I agree. Yes.
And that's what made it different and of concern. It might be more efficient, but so is all shortcuts to grandma's house.
Yeah, there are many, like you said, there are many unknowns to do with remote viewing that people are taking it lightly, the same way as people will be using Ouija boards and playing with spirits, not really knowing where they're going.
External.
I totally agree with that, but there are certain cases where people do experience.
Well, yeah, except what do you think it's doing to the structured water in your microtubular, the so-called physical element of the soul? And that, for me, is where James Hillman, Kubler-Ross, and others talk about soul making. And you have to be very careful, just like if you integrate yourself with an AI and become a cyborg.
I still believe that. I still believe that. Yeah, in my experience, I think remote viewing, it's mostly to do with frequencies, and it's the power of intent, which is being used by Terry Anderson to, for example, impact people's traumas through the power of intent. Like you can send negative vibes the same way as remote viewing was probably used to kill people, right? Remotely. Or having an impact on agents.
That gut part of your habitat. You're not human. You're, as one way of looking at you, you're only 10% human, and the rest of you are bacteria, molds, and hierarchy of organisms in your gut that give you a sense of instinct, where you have 6 things in front of you, and that one's important to you. And that one, that synchronicity, is one way of seeing that is how a future timeline is communicating to your moment. And when you actually integrate that, good luck, what happens next is you change your path. For example, when I was studying and developing the SEAL program, it was not Navy SEALs. It was SEAL Corp out of Amherst. Now, it later became Navy SEALs. It later became Superman. But at the moment, that we were doing it, it wasn't like that at all. It was us trying to integrate internal state functions and take control of the parasympathetic nervous system. That's why Andrea Puharich wrote that monumental book, Beyond Telepathy. My mentor, Sir Stanley Krippner, was doing dream telepathy at that time with Montague Ullman at Maimonides Dream Labs. And these constructs of what ESP is and what it is not, at the time I was doing the studies, was considered a no-no word, like hypnosis. And hypnosis now is a very powerful tool. That is your first steps in magic, and why physics is going to become magic, where it's advanced physics with a mystery school. You don't really know how it works, but there's something that comes through the whole thing, like the Sefer Yetzirah, and how sound and words create music.
We have to be careful, Richard, about the use of the word magic and its definition based on deception. Many people associate the Anunnaki, the Enki, with
I'm a Quaker.
With the power of illusion, right? And so, the magic you are using is not so much something that is fabricated to create an illusion. It's to be aware of different realities and going.
How did I put it in physics? Gee, that's just too bad if the two are inconsistent. Actually, the order of the silver star, or geum or genum, is with the method of physics toward the aim of religion. And the two are actually the same. And the leading religion of this world today is not Christianity or Muslimism, it's science. At least that's what the military think. Because the physicist reached over and went click, and the light was good, and it served all. Now, with that said, physics has no more answers than religion does. Religion, for me, is fellowship, trying to find people with similar belief systems to reinforce my own moral codes of ethics and rules of conduct. One of the things that I do spend a great deal of time talking about now is the difference between intent and purpose, and the idea of ethics and morals. Ethics is when an ethical man knows not to cheat on his wife. A moral man won't. That's Ducky Mallard out of NCIS. And intent is actually what happens at the end of the day over purpose, which is slightly different, and what an AI cannot predict you're going to do. It can predict intent because it already has taken into account the algorithms of being born, you know, into a physical world, a hostile world. First thing that happens to you is somebody hits you and you're taken away from your mother to be fingerprinted. That's Stephen Gaskins. And the idea of spiritual midwifery and the idea of how you're whelped into this universe to be distinguished quite differently than a dog, which has got a much closer relationship to spirit than we do. Mm-hmm. And spirit is not what you do, but how you do it. And that's how you get closer to the Lord, not your personal belief in it, the walking the talk part. Mm-hmm. That's the distinction between ethics and morals.
So when I did an hypnotherapy session back in January, so very recently in a way, I decided to welcome whatever will come. And
I did that once too, man.
I ended up going through like a tree with the toe-shaped symbol, and I was thrown into a black hole. And what we called heaven opened up, and I was in heaven along with other souls. And I could see pastel colors, very bright lights. I saw like a castle, like crystal castles on the right-hand side. And as I went towards it, detaching myself from this oneness that was already, you know, pretty much everywhere.
Cosmic consciousness.
I was seeing those hexagonal shape walls. That it's almost like there was a limit to this space. And when I went through it, it had cellulose shape. It had a texture. I could see almost through it. And when I went through it, I was immersed into a different universe. And step by step, I went through the same hexagonal shapes to then go and meet with what we call Ea or Enki. And that was a very
about this, by the way. You should.
And I never heard the name Ea before, like the letters E and A, which is the other name for Enki. And I never heard of those letters before, and I kept repeating it to the therapist. And because I was saying A-R, she said, "What do you mean R? You know, like R-A or something?" Like she was trying to say different letters, so I had to spell it out for her the way it sounded to me. But the reason why I'm saying this today is because the hexagonal shape is also used and known by the Freemasons, obviously, in many ways. Yeah. And while I'm not immersed into this culture, I still want to talk about the Cassini satellite that went through Saturn and saw that two-size Earth shape, hexagonal shape on the pole of Saturn, that is also known by the Freemasons probably as the Saturn's cube.
So, Necker cube of space, Paul Foster Case, and the occult. When I came out of graduate school, I was assaulted like a high school kid going to college by lodges. What is a lodge? Well, about 400 years ago, lodges were formed as mystery schools for the ultra elite of Europe. And these would be your poets like William and Westcott. You know, Golden Dawn is a typical lodge. Crowley did his others with OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis, Order of the Temple of the Orient. And what I had to do is armor up like I did for Christianity. My parents raised me as an atheist. I'm not, but they were atheists, and they sent me to Missouri Synod Catechism to armor me. In other words, get me prepared for the assault I was going to enjoy as a teenager with all those that believed moved to the center of the stage, you know. And I found that the truth for myself did not lie out there in written word or things. I found my truth inside and came to the realization that first off, I was very lucky. I was talking to myself right out of the crib. That's what is called self-realization. It's halfway to God, you know, where you have union with self. And they talk about that place as Tippereth in the Tree of Life. And then you have this immense vacuum of Sea of Crons, and, you know, between you and God, there's a middle Sephirah, the 10th one missing, called Dath, D-A-A-T-H, where it's a metaphor of wisdom through knowledge. It's a temporary place. We're playing Follow the Leader, and I run down a hill and you run down a hill, and then I come to a roaring river, and without hesitation, I leap out into the center of it, touch on a rock that you didn't see, that was under the water, just briefly under the water, and tapped on it and leaped over to the other side. That's Dath as a center point. Mm-hmm. And the outer paths to God, male and female side, going to God, are the lovers and the hermit. You either go androgynously or you go with a physical metaphor or representation into the physical world as a metaphor. And the path that crosses them, forming a triangle, going right through Dath, is called humor. Now, isn't that an interesting discovery? And what did these guys know? And so I spent 6 years studying with Gershom Scholem out of New York City College. I became a Hermetic Kabbalist. I use the Kabbalah in my everyday life as a navigating tool, kind of like Captain Jack Sparrow and his little compass. You know, I open my compass up because I don't know where I'm going, and I let the compass help me determine. I love that new movie, Pirates of the Caribbean. It's excellent, you know, it's excellent. And of course, Johnny Depp is just Johnny Depp in his fullness. And everything is in metaphor. And our current lodges, like the Republican Party and some of the others, most of these do not know goat turds from pork and beans, and why I'm coming out with the new courses I taught at Harvard for 11 years, graduate level. John Mack took my third course, Meta 3, and then started his alien abduction studies. And one of the first things as his teacher, in that sense of it, was to tell him that him doing this to try to validate the existence of God was futile. He couldn't, by definition, couldn't do that. What he could do is treat the trauma now being experienced by multiple different areas, including targeted individuals. I'm seeing it coming up in all kinds of metaphor, you know, where people are becoming more aware of the fact that there's something more going on than just our sleep place called consciousness, and that we have all these tools to do things we cannot do in conscious state. And that is going to be the new direction in physics, studying those things. And that, by definition, is magic with a K, not magic with a C. I was at the Magic Castle in Hollywood at the lead table that it takes 6 weeks to get a thing, and I decided the night before I wanted to go, and somehow people canceled at the last moment, and the Hollywood lawyer and some IT friends of mine got me the front table. And when the owner came up and said, well, I see a lapel, a little button on you that looks like it's a magical lodge. What is the difference between your circle in mind. And mine, the way my response was to him, well, you are sleight of hand, and I'm sleight of mind. And that's what we're doing, is training the mind as a tool, not an absolute, gives you all the answers. It doesn't. It's there as a tool to be directed and trained, because right now we're a little bunch of kids running around undisciplined. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised that all of our aliens and apocalypse are because we're creating them in our own mind right now. And I remember the way I trained SEALs in terms of everything happens for a reason, everything leads to something better. Is that glass half full or is that half empty? That's what God gave you as a choice. And to look at it as half full is to see our apocalypse, our impending apocalypse, as an opportunity for the advancement of consciousness. And that death is not something to fear like heaven and hell, but going home, where we originally started from with this little sleeper, imagine little detour we've taken. And Zen Gardner, others, they have ostracized and removed what I felt was a better writer than me, Zen Gardner, but he was Children of God, so he's no good. You know, just like my PhD is from some bogus place, so it's no good. Isn't about that. Zen Gardner did a very important quote when he talked about the last grand illusion that's given you at the moment of death. And that's discussed in the Bordeaux Thedal, not the one that Timothy Leary and all use for set and setting, which is critical. But the original Bordeaux Thedal will discuss the last grand illusion, where you have a choice between going through the tunnel of light or the blue light. And it talks about that, and that's something that we all need to understand, because the physical plane, as I understand it, isn't real. What's real is your imagination and your personal okay. That would suggest that there are as many different religions as there are human beings or human souls, and that each of us is what gives man God's favored, because you have the choice. And if we seemingly are different from each other in our beliefs, that part is God's will, and that comes directly from the original teachings of Christ and what they are called Essene Gospels. And when you go back, I've studied and taught metaphysics for 11 years, 15 different courses on these different subjects, trying to understand what physics and religion are and what they are not. And like all models of the universe, with doors that open to you, other doors are closed. That's why we choose Hilbert space over another form or model of universe, because we can solve the problem that we're seeking in that form of universe with those definitions and those assumed truths. Each is, I mean, obviously, if you assumed that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, I can absolutely prove to you using special mathematics that the Earth is flat. I can prove it to you if you make an assumption.
The
Once you say the Earth space is curved, of course the Earth is flat, because the Earth is not revolving around the sun. The sun is moving through space, and the Earth is following in its tails. And in part, okay, and so you're not in the same moment as you go around the Earth each time, and that's why astrology, and then later higher forms of cosmobiology. There is, in one of the studies I did that will be in Spook Central, studies the planet Uranus, not Saturn, and whenever the planet Uranus is in a specific moment geometry with the sun and the Earth, a major earthquake happens. I'm not talking about 3 sigma. I'm talking about...
Sorry, Richard, are you saying that the Earth is flat? Is that your statement?
No, I'm saying it's all of it predicated on your assumed truths and definitions.
Okay. The
Then
same way,
you
the same
assume,
way as the Hollow Earth. You know, people talk about the Hollow Earth. It is the same idea.
yeah, the idea that when you have a quantum universe, which is based on space-time,
Mm-hmm.
what that also gives you is a solution. It's Heisenberg's uncertainty, and that the more you know about one thing, the less you know about another. And I will draw to your attention what they call the many-body problem, and trying to predict where an electron is in the nucleus.
Mm-hmm.
It's not possible because of the uncertainty principle. The more you know about this, the less you know about that. However, in a quantum universe, if you create a holographic universe,
Mm-hmm.
based on information rather than measurements in space and time, now you have another problem in what information is and what it is not. And isn't it interesting that the more you move through space-time, going forward in time, the more you so-called know, the more questions you have.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's an interesting metaphor. And that's why one of the primary definitions of information is, quote, if you have enough information to ask a coherent question, you have enough information to answer it. It is in the resolution of the information that the answers lie.
Mm-hmm.
Physical, emotional, intellectual, archetypal.
You know, the issues I have with religion.
Neurotransmitters, by the way.
That's okay. You know, the issues I have with religions in general is that it's there's a lot of room for interpretation, and the idea.
Oh, it's a good place to get a baseball team and play baseball. I love fellowship.
It's more that the issue is to always look up to someone, look up to something that will give us some answers, rather than looking within ourselves to become, you know, sovereign beings again, which is the end goal here, is to access the path of enlightenment, is to truly discover who we are, where we come from,
and why we're here.
And why we are here. And I think it's to do with the experience. And I've gone through all these journeys myself, so it doesn't really have any mysteries to me anymore. But I still have, I still have.
I'm so sorry to hear that. There will be continual mysteries. Trust me.
There are mysteries.
I still don't know.
Yes, there are mysteries beyond. There are mysteries beyond what I haven't discovered yet, for sure. Because time is infinite.
Like that. That's what going into the future means. That's what that part of the cavitation, and why it's a toroidal surface or topological surface. It's no longer when that drop of water hits a pool of water and pops back up again. It's no longer a drop of water.
Mm-hmm.
It has exclusion zone water that has trapped the medium in which it fell, and is now our primary understanding of how cold fusion and free energy works.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's free. It's always going to cost you, and for that, you must join the church.
You see, like for what you mentioned about death and life, and going from to heaven or hell. This duality system, as you know, is just again another illusion. It's the grand illusion, and I think that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that people, have a fear of dying. It's more about the fear itself that is causing.
It's an enemy. It is a demon, by the way, that's listed in the Lesser Keys of Solomon, the Goetia, as rage, jealousy, anger, fear. All of these were qualities in man, lesser parts of man, you've got all these different complex, that were deemed unworthy.
Mm-hmm.
That's what a demon is.
Yeah.
And
it's another metaphor.
It's a metaphor.
Yeah.
That's why the so-called soft sciences of Jungian psychotherapy were in a higher culture like Greece.
Mm-hmm.
With philosophers of Aristotle and Plato.
Now, I have a question for you. I know this is not really your field, but would you say that the same correlation is seen in the universe today with the New Age movement, from the bad ETs and the good ETs?
The good, the bad, and the ugly. I believe the way Real Magic was written by Isaac Bonewitz when he got a degree in magic at the University of California at Berkeley. There's a chapter called White Magic, Black Magic, and Living Color. It's arbitrary. Right. And our first step in understanding something is to work in polarization of binary. It's either a 1 or it's a 0. But, you know, binary code. But when my daughter used to say to me, Daddy, I love this and I hate that, I used to say to her, I'll bet you I could find something that you hate even more. And so with that said, it became a concept of preferences.
Right.
And the idea of the yin yang always contained an element of the other.
Mm-hmm.
The yin contained the yang, the yin and the yang. The idea of how to, that's the word off, going through a line of 6 hostile individuals. The way you do that is by doing the yin yang symbol with your hand, protecting your crotch and your face. Oh, isn't that interesting? And that's what made martial arts, because when I studied them, they weren't martial arts. They were a form of meditation. And I did a Northern Shaolin form called Hungao, and my daughter is does Hungar, Southern form. And what Hungao and Hungar are dragon, that's because everything is done in a circle. Everything is in a circle.
Mm-hmm.
And bigger circles, smaller circles. And that concept came out of thousands of years to be distinguished differently than karate, which is straightforward, mm-hmm. Boom, whereas the Chinese did a circle. Whoa. And didn't matter where the thing, you could be blindfolded and you still had defense. Mm-hmm. That's why I chose to study that form. I, unfortunately, grew up in the Philippines when I was 4 years old, and I was Caucasian. And I don't know if you know much about their culture, but they work like monkeys. One can't take you down, but 20 can. And so I learned how to fight on my back. And that was one of the first things I did with the SEALs. I said, we're going to do a thing called last man standing. Now, just in my statement of that, I misdirected them, because I then turned the light out and they all started beating each other up. And the first thing I did is I went down on my back, and because I could hit upwards, there was no defense. And at the end, turned the light back on, and I was the one standing because I went to my back on the ground and wasn't approachable that way. Mm-hmm. That's why they called me the boogeyman. It's a construct of metaphors. And once you understand that metaphor, now you're getting toward union with self. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say I'm blessed was I'm not a saint, and that's not my goal, is to become a saint or a fifth plane mystic. I'm more like a fourth plane. I used to smoke pot with Pir Vilayat Khan up on Shah Island, man. I grew up with all of these things. I studied with Krishnamurti at Indralaya, and I had as a physicist. And what I did was get a broader sense of what physics is and what it is not. And that is my education. And they don't give degrees on that. That's called life. Mm-hmm. And where I am today is that I know I don't know. Why? Well, because some things like God are unknowable. You can only experience him. You can't know him. It's you have to, the moment. It's at this moment. It's not, and what changes that moment is when you go from the profane into the sacred. And right. That is where you're in connection with the future and your past as one closed system and the moment. Mm-hmm. That's St. Augustine, and what made, in my opinion, the Greek constructs of philosophy far more advanced than our current systems of science.
Mm-hmm. So I have a question for you, because it's something that is all over the internet as well, and you can read it, in many posts on Facebook and so on. What is your take on the current dimension that we live in, and what we're aspiring to move on to assuming that the frequency will change, and because this is all to do with frequencies at the end. We can't learn ourselves. If we move from one dimensions to another, it was because we are opening ourselves up to higher dimensions or higher frequencies,
or different ways of seeing things.
That's right.
Or hearing things, or
broadening our spectrum of frequencies.
Yeah, right.
So
turns out we have other senses in our body besides the five.
Of course. So
we haven't defined them yet.
So what is your take on ascension? What people call ascension? I'm not referring to the time of death, of people dying and then moving up to a higher dimension. Right. I'm talking about still remaining within our bodies, being more aware of frequencies that will change our DNA. So we are in full control of our DNA. So we will be able to somehow move into a higher state of consciousness that will.
We have that system already built into us. The embryonic holography paper I wrote suggested that the DNA was a three-dimensional hologram of four space, who you were, who you are, and who you will become. But the brain is a four-dimensional hologram of five space, because it's a amorphous semiconductor, liquid crystal phases. It's constantly changing, which suggests that if you were to go to different parts of the brain, you could change the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I call ascension. That realization of netter new.
That's nicely put. And would you say that the people today, more and more people are suffering from tinnitus, which is an imbalance, obviously, of frequencies in the brain? And I've actually watched something. My wife suffers from tinnitus. She had brain surgery as well because she had an acoustic neuroma on the right side of the brain, on the hearing nerve. So I've discovered a technique on the internet which is pretty amazing. When you put your palms on your hand like this, and you basically tap your fingers like this 50 times in a row, and
you're working with old technology again. There you go.
And half of the people who experienced it didn't have any tinnitus, so it was greatly reduced.
It's called the Shabd, S-H-A-B-D. It is the voice of the silence. That's a poetry out of the Upanishads that's been translated by many people. It is the lost chord. It is Gaia at the end of the rainbow singing the so-called zero-point energy. It has had many names in history. That is what you seek, because when you dream a certain form of dream, lucid dreaming, you focus on that sound current. It's in the right ear. It's not in both ears. It's the right ear. And what happens next is you don't astral project, you soul travel. And that's Ekankar and other people that have written about someone saying, Saran saying, others. In and around the 14th century, a bunch of Indians, teachers, got together and they said, we all know what we don't agree on. I think it's this way, you think it's that way. But within all of us, we have an underlying set of principles that we all agree upon. One of which was the importance of meditation. 1/10 of your life is dedicated toward the training of your mind. And it's a hard thing to do. And the way I jump-started that, like I did with drugs, with dimethyltryptamine and lysergic acid diethylamide, which is a toxin, LSD, was to use brain drivers. It will give you what Persinger is studying up in Montreal, the idea of the distinction between someone that has been meditating for 30 years and the difference between that brain and yours and the way it functions and networks. I started doing that out of childhood. Mm-hmm. And that has led me to become the monster that I am. And I'm only just a lead scout in that development of contingent negative variation, CNV, that jump potential between neurons and dendrites, and the go, no-go signal of getting access to the memory, which is already there, and the aluminum that is inhibiting me from getting there. Is that a metaphor? Yeah, you're getting it. And there were other principles that came out. You weren't supposed to eat anything with the face of grandparents. You weren't supposed to, have sex out of wedlock. That the lower chakras had purpose and intent. Intent as opposed to purpose.
Right, yes.
So when you seek a goal, you should realize that by the way Christ would put it, that we're all born sinners, that at some point you've broken one of the commandments, that there's always edgy spaces. Let me give you an example of that. The difference between intelligence and counterintelligence. Counterintelligence is lying by omission. You don't tell a lie. You just misdirect by the truths you give.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what do you think the Catholic Church has done to our so-called translations of the Bibles?
Right. Oh, I agree. It's completely.
Well, if you're getting that as a concept, then you understand the difference between sleight of hand, sleight of mind.
Mm-hmm.
And the sleight of mind is going to be, in my opinion, the new directions of physics, where we are going to try to understand more of the so-called soft sciences of the mind,
mm-hmm.
and what it is and what it is not.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question because it's interesting too. It's all over the internet. It's not a secret. So I'm sure you'll be free to talk about it.
Discovery. That new movie, The Discovery. It isn't. That's why everybody is in that movie is committing mass suicide. Who wants to be here when they can go home?
Mm.
Well,
so the Bible has the Numbers chapters in it. And within the Numbers chapters, you may know that the Freemasons, and especially Sir Bacon and King James, in the King James Bible, inserted the solfeggio frequencies within the Numbers chapters, which was done by the Freemasonry at the time.
So there are good people, bad people in living color, just like there ever was. Oh, that's Talking Heads. Sorry, is this my house burning down?
But what I'm saying is it's again the hiding the frequencies away within a living
432 as opposed to 440 and the Nazi movement. Good luck with that. I will tell you that it all started with Pythagoras. And if you use his concepts of octaves, that you will find natural resonance, which does not occur at 440 cycle. Mm-hmm. And 440, Gary Robert Buchanan, a friend of mine that later started SONA and in New Mexico and does a lot of frequency studies with cymatics and the idea of crop circles and the rest of it. There's something more going on here, and that's one of the reasons one of the surviving Old Testaments is the Sefer Yetzirah. There's another one that has not survived that you will find in the Cauldron Bibles dealing with movement, like Ghost Dance, Whirling Dervish, and Rodent Coils. And I am writing about that one in the chapter called Rock the Casimir, or Adventures, plural, in Time Travel. Now, I am sensing there's something more when you do a movement. And so the people I've been studying is Gabriel Roth and her dance and her study under Kate Bush. And prior to that was Kenneth Anger and the Magic Lantern series of dance and movement, how they also change space-time. I know, for example, that Cleopatra went down the Mississippi River and the Colorado because we have artifacts we're now finding from her, looking for copper for the capstone on the pyramid. What do you think the pyramid is? Well, some have now begun to suggest it might be a doorway using sound and movement and the way you would traverse going from one chamber to another as a metaphor. Now, I know I don't know, but this is where my sciences have taken me trying to understand that which is probably not understandable by definition, like God. You can't know something, you can experience it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a proper definition of what God is. God is that which cannot, by definition, be known.
Which is kind of the magic reference you are using. It's also referencing to the fact that we can't study it really. We have to experience it in order to discover.
That's why physics is magic, because it's advanced physics with a mystery school.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why one of the first books I would recommend for all women to read is Esther Harding and The Way of All Women, or Women's Mysteries,
mm-hmm.
and the Eleusinian form of the psyche at the Well of Souls. And the metaphor is that women have things that men will never understand. That's why James Hillman made a distinction between the anima and the animus, which are different for each of us in the male to the female. They're not polar opposites. They're quite different, because a woman is quite different than a man. It's not the opposite side of masculine and feminine. However, the two paths to God from the outer paths are either the hermit or the lovers, which means that you either do it androgynously with integration, or you have a physical representation in the physical world of what most and best suits that inner part of self. And that's why most marriages don't work, because the values of the one are not the same as the other. Mm-hmm. And that's when that woman that you're in love with and, is no longer representing that inner part of self that you seek.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think marriage is, basically a journey. Everybody experiences their own journey, and you have to adapt to
broom travel.
Person.
Jumping the broom.
So I've been married for 17 years, and I can tell you it's a journey, right? You have to learn.
Yeah, and the journey that you're experiencing is that you both will change. That's law.
Well,
but changing in the same direction, so that your values remain the same. If they're slightly different, mm-hmm. as Maslow, the marriage is going to have a rough edge. There are things you aspire toward. And again, those goals are not achievable per se, just mm-hmm. like sin. There's different levels or agreements. Have I ever killed? Thou shalt not kill. Well, yes, I have actually in the military, defending myself and defending my family. Mm-hmm. Now, is that thou shalt not kill? Well, Jains is a religious cult in India, will sweep in front of every step, so they will not step on an ant. Mm. It's all in degrees of metaphor, of intent over purpose. Mm-hmm. And intent, there's third generation D-Wave technology now that will know what I'm going to do 28 minutes before I do. But if I go to purpose, which is slightly different than intent. Intent is what actually happens. Purpose now is something more. And that's where Aleister Crowley et al. In the Forms of Magic would say, and then if you're doing your true purpose, none shall say nay. That is, by the way, the highest form of love in the Greek words of eros, philo, agape, telema, or thelema. Okay. The love of will, the love of your purpose here. Once you discover that, now you are halfway to God. Mm-hmm. And experiencing. Okay.
Well, on these notes, Richard, I thank you so much for your time. I think we are running out of time right now, but it's been a great interview. I really appreciate your commitment to share your information, your stories. And also, we haven't really discussed, many other topics like time travel and so on, or even your experience with the X-Files. So perhaps we could talk about this on a second interview down the line.
Be my pleasure. Be my pleasure.
So it was a great show. I really
you did an impossible job keeping me on
On track, I know. I know. I heard your interviews.
That's why you did an excellent job, because good luck with that.
Thank you. Have a good day. Thank you so much. See you next time.